In the era of the super team, there's been more attempts at players trying to assemble a squad of superstars than any other era in NBA history. However, it's always a risky decision by the teams to go forward with it. Some teams give up everything. They give up their entire future, and it takes years to rebuild if this super team fails. Other teams realize early on that it's not gonna work and cut their losses quickly, amassing a large number of draft picks in return. So the damage of a failed super team is not as bad as it seems. Years ago, I made a video on the 2013 Los Angeles Lakers and how I basically tried to explain why they were the worst super team ever assembled. And right from the get-go, you knew it wasn't gonna work. So if you wanna watch an in-depth video on that team, I'll put the link in the description. Today, let's talk about some others. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today, let's take a look at the NBA's worst super teams since 2010, and why were they so bad. Westbrook, George, and Melo. In the summer of 2017, the Oklahoma City Thunder acquired Paul George in a trade that most people thought heavily favored the Thunder. They also acquired Carmelo Anthony in another trade that was initially very good. This was back when Melo just came off an All-Star season in his last year in New York. On paper, people were skeptical if this team could actually work. There might not be enough balls to go around. The main guy to pay attention to was Melo. At this point, he still believed he was a superstar, so he demanded touches like he was a superstar. However, his efficiency heavily regressed, but he refused to become a spot-up shooter. Eventually, he did transition into that role later in his career, but it was years after he left OKC. This trio only played for one season together, and the Thunder won just one more game than they did in the previous season, when Westbrook was carrying the team by himself. Then in the playoffs, they once again got bounced in the first round. That happened again in the season after, with Melo already gone. It was a short-lived super team, but on the bright side, Sam Presti recognized this experiment was a failure right away. So they quickly traded away everybody, including Westbrook, within 2 seasons. Unlike most other teams, they recognized his time was up, and by trading away him and George, they amassed a huge number of draft picks. 7 first-round picks and 5 future pick swaps between the two of them. It was a colossal haul, so at least they got a kickstart to their rebuild. Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. When the Kings traded Cousins to New Orleans in 2017, it paired together arguably the 2 best centers in the NBA at that time. Not just that, but in the 2017-18 season, the two of them combined to score 53.3 points per game, the highest among any duo in the league. Even higher than Durant and Curry, who combined for 52.8 in that season. Unfortunately, the Pelicans as a team were struggling for most of that season until Cousins got injured. In January of 2018, he tore his Achilles in the final moments of a game, which was a horrible incident, don't get me wrong. In fact, since that injury, Cousins has never been the same again. On the bright side, Cousins' injury forced the Pelicans to play smaller and faster. And as a result, they made a massive run towards the end of the season, which included a 10-game winning streak shortly after he went down. Heck, they even swept the heavily favored Portland Trail Blazers in the first round, as Rondo and Holiday dismantled the Blazers' backcourt. Sadly, the Pelicans could not return to the playoffs. It was only Davis' second time making the playoffs in 7 seasons in New Orleans. The Pelicans traded for Cousins in the first place to make a last-ditch effort to build around Davis, but it was just horrible timing with that injury. Plus, when they actually did play together, their chemistry wasn't perfect either. Yes, both of them got their numbers, but they didn't make each other better. Statistically, the team was actually better when only one of them was on the floor while the other was on the bench, according to PBP stats. So yeah, the injury sucked, but even without it, this duo wasn't gonna last very long. Westbrook, Davis, and LeBron. Is it weird that both Westbrook and Davis showed up on the list again? Or is it just a coincidence? Well, we know that the duo of LeBron and Davis won the championship in 2020. But after an injury-filled season, the Lakers felt like they needed to make a huge splash in the 2021 offseason, even though they really didn't have to. But they did anyway because they're the Lakers, so why not? They traded away basically all their important role players for Westbrook, who was joining his 4th team in 3 seasons. Pretty much all reports have said that LeBron made a huge push to get Westbrook, even though the Lakers originally wanted to go after DeMar DeRozan. Though I'm not too sure how DeRozan would have fared playing alongside LeBron either. He essentially revitalized his career in Chicago, so I'm sure the Lakers would love to have him right now. Still, this experiment was a failure. And immediately after they traded him away, they got so much better. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. I was debating on whether or not to put this duo on the list. When they teamed up together in the summer of 2019, the expectations were very high. Paul George just came off an MVP caliber season in OKC, but they weren't winning. And Kawhi just came off of winning the championship in Toronto. The hype was real. As for George, prior to his arrival in LA, he was actually contacted by Kawhi on potentially teaming up. It was the reason why George requested a trade before free agency even opened. It was kind of funny because prior to Kawhi reaching out, Westbrook actually reached out to Kawhi first, asking him if he wanted to team up in LA. I mean, all three of these guys are from Los Angeles, so it makes sense why they want to return home. But Kawhi basically rejected Westbrook's request to team up, and instead he signed with the Clippers himself and then told them to trade for George. This whole ordeal was sketchy as hell because of all the player-to-player tampering. Regardless, the two of them found immediate success in the first couple seasons, but after 4 seasons of playing together, they've had the worst luck, with only one healthy playoff run in 2021. It honestly looked like they could have made the finals that year if it wasn't for Kawhi's ACL injury. Unlike most other teams on this list, this duo legitimately works well together. You have 2 superstar wing players who are elite at both ends of the floor. They can shoot, they can dribble, they can create, they can play off of each other. It's a perfect duo. Plus, the Clippers have arguably the deepest roster in the league, to the point where they have so many good players that they don't know who to give minutes to. It's just been horrendous luck with injuries, but there's been a ton of pressure on Kawhi to become fully healthy and do what they set out to accomplish. Is it me, or does Kawhi have one of the strangest careers in history? He's won 2 championships, 2 finals MVPs on 2 different teams, yet he's missed so many games in his career, so he doesn't have the longevity of most other all-time greats. But if he's healthy, he's freaking amazing. But lately, that's been a pretty big if. When it finally looked like they were gonna enter the playoffs healthy, George got injured near the end of the regular season by tweaking his knee. And Kawhi, he played the first 2 games in the playoffs, but then he found out he had a torn meniscus. So that was that. However long this duo plays together, if this team does not make the finals, they would have heavily underachieved. Pierce, KG, Joe Johnson, Darren Williams, and Brook Lopez. I'm sure we all remember this horrendous trade the Brooklyn Nets made back in 2013. In return for KG, Pierce, and Jason Terry, who all belonged in a retirement home, the Nets gave up Gerald Wallace plus some other rotation players. But most importantly, they gave up 3 unprotected first-round picks in 2014, 2016, and 2018, and the right to swap first-rounders in 2017. 2 of those picks eventually became Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the current franchise cornerstones of the Celtics. The worst thing about this futile attempt at constructing a super team was that the Nets were literally better the season before they did this trade. In the 2012-13 season, they won 49 games with a core of Joe Johnson, Darren Williams, and Brook Lopez. They were a solid veteran team surrounded by even more solid role players. Fast forward a season later, and now they're just plain old. They won just 44 games, but they did squeeze into the second round of the playoffs, where they got dismantled by the Heat. While KG was an all-star the previous season, his age hit him like a Mack truck, as he had the worst season of his career by far. He looked completely ineffective, and he was basically on his way out of the league at this point. Pierce was a little bit better, but overall, they were such a slow team that was quite miserable to watch. It also didn't help that Brook Lopez, the team's leading scorer, was out for the majority of the season with a foot injury. This overhyped super squad only lasted 1 season. Pierce quickly realized that this experiment was not gonna work, and he left the team in the offseason. KG requested a trade shortly after, and the Nets began a new era of tanking, but without many draft picks to build with. And unfortunately, this wasn't the only failure of a Nets team. This brings us to the present. Simmons, KD, and Kyrie. This has got to be the worst super team, or attempt at a super team, ever created. It was better with James Harden instead of Simmons, but that was kind of short-lived. But if they weren't injured in the 2021 playoffs, they could have had it that year. But with the whole Kyrie debacle, Harden demanded a trade, and they got Simmons. Since acquiring Simmons, it went further downhill. When these three were together, not even playing on the court together, because they barely did that, but just on the same team, it seemed like there was some sort of drama going on all the time. Before, it was the whole vaccination ordeal with Kyrie. He missed half the season because he couldn't play in home games. On the court, Simmons' talent seemingly vanished, and he's been nourishing a never-ending injury. For an entire season, he sat out, which got people wondering if he was really injured or just holding out because he didn't want to embarrass himself. With Ben's mental block and lack of motivation, and Kyrie missing so many games and eventually demanding a trade, it made it seem like Kevin Durant was the most normal person on this team. It's crazy because Durant was having one of the best seasons of his career, so to see his contributions being wasted on that dumpster fire of a Nets team, it was sad to see. Anyway, that's all folks. What are your thoughts on some of these teams? Could they have done things differently? Can you guys predict where the next super team will be? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.